There you go. Hey guys, I'm Trixie, aka the Thoughtful Beast. Welcome to the Ready to Talk podcast. I am here with Jojo today, and we're going to be. I already forgot what this is called. We're talking about basically how colleges don't really give f about their students' mental health. That's really what we're talking about. The fluffies and succulents. We'll get to that in a second. Before we get there, Jojo, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Good evening or good afternoon. My name is Jojo or Joseph. I am a PhD candidate in cultural studies at Claremont Graduate University. I work at UC San Diego at Spaces, which is a student-run, student-initiated, student-governed, and student-funded center on campus doing access work. So I work with these different student organizations to do outreach and access programs to local high schools who identify as first generation, low income, who are undocumented, who are immigrants, or children of immigrants, who are refugees, or who are children of refugees, foster. A lot of marginalized communities in San Diego are the ones that we try to support and give resources to help them pursue higher education. And so, being a staff at UCSD, that's where I met Trixie. She was an undergrad. Granted, we didn't really know each other in that sense, right? We just saw each other at different at the organization, the Filipino American organization. And then later on, it was like, you're Igorot, you're Igorot. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? Like,
we're like at the same
and all of a
time.
sudden we just looked at each other and we're just like, why didn't I know? Why didn't I know? Why didn't we talk about this? So I thought that was really interesting. And that's I think how we started because they're like, I heard you're an Igorot, and I was like, so am I, and then that's how it pretty much started.
Yeah. And thank you for joining me here. I totally forgot. So before we keep going, so down there scrolling is Dee McClure's San Diego Bailout. That is our local bailout fund. Please remember that people are still protesting. The news just isn't showing it. So if you would like to help with that bail fund, that's the link right there. I'm also going to comment it right now because I think I did that copy paste. No, I did it. It says ICAP voices. I'm going to copy it really quick and paste it. But please remember, they're still out there. There are many different ways to help. But if you have some money to give, money is also and always helpful for our bailout fund. Oh, and also it's grassroots, just so you all know. So that's also a great community thing to support. Grassroots is the way to go. And also you can go there and see Jojo's I Got Voices on Instagram, and you can visit that too. And check that out and see what an Igorot is. If you don't know what that means, you're like, what is that? What is that? What is that?
Igorot. Yeah, I've heard all of them.
Dude, someone like another Filipino went to me like, "Egot? Are you trying to say you're egot?" And I'm like, "No, you're missing letters."
And then that term stems from very, very anti-Black and anti-Native, anti-Indigenous frameworks.
Yeah.
And so
exactly.
And so even many Filipino Americans don't know that the term "egot" is inherently anti-Black and anti-Indigenous and was used to mark Igorots, right, as this cultural other in the Philippines.
Yeah. Someone else who said Igorot to me, like when they said it, they started laughing.
Yeah.
Like, because they know, like, oh, you're saying you're Igorot? And I'm like, I'm not. So thanks. But moving on from moving on, just so you know, look it up. Look up all those things, please. So yes, we met at UCSD, and so today we're actually talking about our experiences at UCSD with mental health. Him as someone who works there as a mentor and an employee, and me as someone who went to UCSD and used their mental health facilities. It's so strange because I feel like I should start just because it's like I'm the student part.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Because I think that's what you're experiencing. It has changed a little bit, but still a common thing. I hear that a lot from the students, and I think sharing your story, particularly with those who might be following me, would be like, oh, things haven't really that changed since then.
Yeah, so it's really the thing. So, okay, so I will say that my first any experience My first experience with mental health, with professional help, was at UCSD. I did it my junior year. I think it was my junior year. Basically, I was having like a buttload of mental breakdowns. I just was not doing well. And luckily, I had a roommate who was just like, have you tried therapy? I think you should try therapy. And at that point, like, I was at my wit's end. Super Filipino, you don't talk about your emotions. For
Or
me,
mental
that's how
health.
or your mental, like, mental health's not even a thing, It's just kind of just like, why are you sad? You need to work, or you need to go
pray
to
it away.
school, or pray it away. And so I, in my head, therapy was just like my very last option, and because I couldn't get it together anymore, years of holding myself together by myself, with whatever mental acrobatics I did, whatever like coping mechanisms that were mostly unhealthy, which was a lot of it was just avoidance and suppression. I just couldn't do it anymore. It's like I basically went to the start of me going to college was this tumble of my mental breakdown. And I really do feel like it's because I was far away enough from home where I could let my guard down. And also at that age, my hypothalamus is it's finally fully developed. So there are like some
That's a GRE word. I'm like,
like there, like I was actually fully aware of everything. I could cognitively understand what had happened to me and that it was bad. And so, I tried to work around it. And then around my junior year, like I started going to therapy, and I went, my roommate, she went to 6th college. So that's where CAPS was at the time. So that's like the mental health services there. I don't remember what CAPS stands for. Counseling
and psychological services.
Counseling and psychological services was at 6th college. So she walked me there. The reason why she knew it was there was just because she went to 6th college. So I went, and it was awkward, going to therapy, like talking about things you don't think you're supposed to be talking about, especially when it's your family. It was so awkward. I was very lucky. I had a really good therapist. And actually, like 2 years ago, I found out that basically after I had that therapist, she retired. Like when I left school, apparently she left. So I had a really good experience with her. And I ended up going on medication, which was also really difficult for me. I really didn't want to do that. I definitely had that, like, I had that stigma that, like, you don't need drugs, like, you're super weak. And I already felt weak because I was going to therapy. And luckily I had a professor that was just like, you need to take care of yourself. Like, this is a normal thing that people go through. People just don't talk about it. And it really helped hearing from her. I'm going to say her name because she's amazing and she won't care. Like, Margaret Marshall, she started the dance program at UCSD. She's an emeritus now. And she told me, like, people go through this, like people go through this. This is normal. People just don't talk about it. Everybody needs help. So I went on medication, and so that was all good. And then here came like the big accept. So like I was told, like, you can only have 6 sessions. And that wasn't enough for me. And my therapist knew too, but it was very much like, 6 sessions isn't enough for you. What we can do is you can take a 6-month break into the new year, and then we can give you another 6 sessions because it's so severe. And in my head, I was like, okay, but it was weird because I'm like, you're saying I'm so severe that I have to wait 6 months to get another 6 sessions. Like, but I mean, what could I do? At that point, I just felt like, okay, well, this is what it is. And so it's when I started that second 6 sessions is when I started getting medication. That's when I started getting medication. And it was into me graduating. And so the thing that was really, really bad was basically, like, after those 6 more sessions, it was just like, bye. bye. And like also like bye from my psychiatrist, because it was all at UCSD. So I graduated, and there was never any talk of like transferring me over to something else, or like anyone being like, and that's, oh my gosh, like it was basically what ended up happening was because I was in denial. Because I was in denial, and I was like, well, I guess if they're letting me go, and no one's checking up on me, that must mean I'm fine. So I ended up just stopped taking my I just stopped taking my medication. Like hardcore, I just stopped because I was like, I guess it's fine. And also like, I also did feel like, looking back at it, I felt like abandoned, because I was like, well, I guess they don't really care. Like no one, like, and I think that's really, it's really irresponsible and neglectful to just like start someone on medication and then just like not do anything to ensure that they continued medication or like even continued seeing a doctor. It was like, I feel like that's neglect. And really, to me, that's malpractice, because why would you do that? Like I was on medication. I still wasn't doing well. I was doing better, but I wasn't doing well. But it was just like, you graduated, so bye. So, I stopped. Like, it was a cold stop for therapy, cold stop for medication. And that just, it set me up for basically my first years after college. I was a hot mess. Became, people say you can't abuse weed. You can totally abuse weed, because I did. Basically what happened is I ended up waking and baking. So what that is, it's like you wake up in the morning and you just smoke. So I would smoke till I basically passed out. And that's just it. Until my boyfriend at the time came home from work or something. I didn't do anything because I didn't know how to handle anything. And my medication was gone, my support was gone. And I was still at that time too embarrassed to be like, I should do something. So, it's interesting. I had a good experience, even though the end of it was horrible. But at some point, I still feel lucky because I know a lot of other people who I personally walked over to CAPS, having an awful time with psychiatrists. One of my friends was told in their first therapy session, oh, it's so weird. You should have been a drug dealer or a stripper. Literally, that was their response to them sharing their trauma. Which is that face. Why? Why would you do that? Yeah, that I guess that's where we'll start. So, Joseph.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for sharing, and I think that being vulnerable about your experience, but also your struggle post undergraduate is very real for many students. I've had students who tell me that they're freaking out because they have 2-3 months left. It's that last before spring break, right? That quarter before spring quarter. And then that's when it hits them that they're like, oh crap, I have 3 more months left of this support and services. What do I do? And there hasn't been a lot. And I think this isn't not just UCSD. I think this is something very common throughout other universities that I've worked with and worked for. There are no transition when it comes to students who are going through these kinds of struggles, who need these kinds of mental health support. And then they expect you to graduate, get that diploma, and what you said, peace out, right? You handle your own thing now. We're hoping you get it right, but then if anything happens, if everything works out, don't forget 6 months later we need you to donate to as an alumni, right? Because I'm still getting that, and I'm like, no, I still owe you money. So I think those things are not uncommon. And what you went through is something I've heard so many instances with students. And it's also very hard, especially if you're a person of color, if you're a woman of color, if you're a queer or trans person, trans person of color, someone with other forms of disabilities. There's not a lot of resources when it comes to mental health on campus, right, there's a handful of counselors and psychologists in any campuses that are of color, who are women of color, who are queer or trans identified. Even then, I haven't really met a lot of trans identified psychologists in campuses, in the various campuses that I've gone through. Uh, and so trying to find someone to listen to you, who can show, sympathy and empathy for you, and who can just be there, right? That
Yeah.
it becomes hard because at times you're just like, crap, I'm taking time from another person of color who's another woman of color who's a trans or queer person because I am taking that 1 hour with this psychologist, right? So all of a sudden it becomes guilty because I went through that. I went when I was an undergrad, I went to CAPS as well. Um, I think it was a different name back then. Um, and I had like the one person of color there, and I was like, oh, I was so happy. And then when I found out that they were queer, I was like, oh, another points, right? And then later on, I was like, I actually felt guilty that I might have been taking time away from someone else who's queer and who's of color, and who's going through other things too. Like it's those moments when you feel like you need to share such a small like resource
Yeah.
that you end up like I ended up self traumatizing myself because I needed help, right?
Yeah.
And it was painful. Like even transitioning out, like, there was no transition. I was lucky enough to find like an on campus job immediately, like during my last year, that like transitioned me. But it was, I know many students who don't have that privilege and that agency to find the resources. They go back to their parents' insurance, right? A lot
Hmm.
of them do end up going to that cycle until they find their job, and it's hard to also be like, hey, I have to also check that box that says I need to have therapy at my
Yeah.
parents' insurance because I'm
Oh
not,
yeah.
because I'm only 22. Um, and then this whole other stuff comes out, right? Like, what happens if my parents find out?
Oh yeah.
What happens if
Yep.
other people find out? So now you're like self-eating yourself because you're trying to figure out, what does my mental health look like for me, because I'm so scared that other people might find out. And it's not
Yep.
even because other people will find out. It's about your own personal guilt that something else might happen, right? There's
Yeah.
the cause and effect of someone whispering behind your parents' back, oh, did you hear? So and so,
Yeah.
your child that goes to therapy. And all of a sudden it's like, do I stop for the sake of like my ancestors and my family line? Like
Yeah.
those things like come up to my head, and it's traumatizing, and
It
it's
is
so hard
traumatizing.
because there's a lot of things that we say in college, like as a student affairs personnel, we always sort of like synchronize talk about like, you need to address mental health, you need to address self-care, self-love, all these things, but we never really talk about what the self-care, self-love, like mental health look like once you grab that diploma, and then
Hmm.
you already have that anxiety of leaving the university. I have students who literally stayed they could have graduated fourth year, but they knew that they had the resources, so they were willing to go into debt for those resources to stay fifth year, 5 years and a half.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, and at first I was like, what the heck are you doing? And then I realized that not only are they getting these support and services on campus, whether it be through mental health or healthcare, but also the fear of going back home means that they're not able to be one, either themselves, whether it be their various intersecting identities, but also that watchful eye, that cultural watchful eye, particularly if you're a student of color, going back home to your parents, right? Like, how the hell I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be gone for 1 hour. Where are you going? Um, Nowhere. But in your head, you're lying because you want to go to therapy, the free counseling
Yeah.
center, or something, and you don't want to say doctor because they're gonna be like, are you sick? Is there something
Yeah.
wrong?
Yeah.
And so all
Yeah.
these things start piling up, and then there's no conversation around uh, what does it mean to support students in transition out of the university when it comes to these services that they really do need, and there are already limited resources on campus. Like you said, you got 6 sessions in a year, right?
Hmm.
6 sessions in 10 months, is it 10, like 9 months?
Yeah.
uh, and then afterwards, good luck, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really, it's not conducive to anyone's health.
No,
Um, and
no,
it becomes more of a burden for you to figure out, and you're
yeah.
still struggling on how to transition out
Or even just like graduate. Like
or
that's
graduate.
so, it's so funny that you say that because like basically what I did was like, because I was like, I don't know how to go home like this, but also I was like,
Mm.
I'm not gonna go home like for so many reasons. So I didn't go home, and I never. When I ended up 2 maybe years later after college going back to therapy, I basically was so lucky because one of my friends was dating a therapist. I had one session with him and he was like, okay, doesn't work. Not that I would ever tell like my boyfriend your story, but like we're too connected for me to be your therapist.
Yeah.
And so I was super lucky because he sent me to a therapist with a super sliding scale. She had a sliding scale and she brought her sliding scale down to me because basically at that point I was suicidal. And she brought it all the way down to $50 per session, which is still a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But like, usually her sliding scale stops at 75, but she dropped it because a friend asked her, and I was suicidal. So I was really lucky. And instead of like, she did it, she would have accepted my parents' insurance because that's TRICARE. Like, who doesn't
Yeah.
accept
Well,
TRICARE?
TRICARE.
Yeah, that's
For those
government
who don't
insurance.
know, TRICARE is like the government military
That's
health
their,
insurance that can
yeah.
get you anything like that pretty much.
Yep. And I didn't do that. Instead, I just got a job. I worked at Justice for Girls. I worked at the mall and I literally worked to pay for therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I was just like, I'm not telling. Like, there's no way. Like, I can't even deal with the reality of this. I can't deal with the reality of like my parents knowing. And I will honestly still tell you, even today, like my parents know nothing. It's really weird because I'm going more public with everything. And I'm just like, at some point it will catch up with me. Like, I'm assuming at some point they'll find out. And this is not an
Or
invitation.
they already know.
Yeah, or they already know. This is not an invitation. Any one of my cousins or whoever, if you see this, I'm not saying tell my parents. Don't tell my parents. But, like, they probably already know something.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, I just can't. I'm so traumatized. I can't have this kind of relationship and be like, this is what's happening. Because I have too much guilt. Like, my mom and my dad are super struggling. Like my mom's a nurse. COVID reached her hospital.
Mm-hmm.
My father is retired and like watched too much news. So like super scared about COVID. My dad's old, like he's 77.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm like, yeah, like if you get it, this is gonna be awful. Like,
Yeah.
and my mom is like old too. Like she should have retired, but she can't right now. And so like it's so weird because even though I feel braver, right? I shouldn't do that. I feel braver right now with like being able to tell them what's happening, but I can't because I'm this is a horrible time. They're both afraid of dying 24/7 right now. Like, why am I going to go? By the way, I've had years of therapy. I have PTSD, mom and dad. Like, there's so much I have. Like, it's like that guilt that you're talking about that your students face. Like, I still face it now, and I'm 31. Like, I've been like years out of college, but like that is it's hard. And right now, like I need to be in therapy right now, but I can't. Like, I know. And see, this is like even the weird part, right? Because going to therapy is one thing. Going to therapy with a specialization is a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can get into a regular therapist right now on my insurance, which is Medi-Cal, but I can't find a specialist because there's only so many, because I need to see, I can't have a male therapist. That's not going to be conducive to me being in therapy. So there's only 2 female therapists that I could see who are specialized in trauma, and they're booked forever. And so like, I'm just on wait lists. And it's like, that's a scary thing too. Like, I don't want to scare anyone for like after college, but like, that's the thing that sucks about mental health. Like, I understand why your students would stay, because dealing with it outside the system, like even on Medi-Cal, I still feel like I have more access to more things than other people do, which is weird, who have like insurance they pay for. But even that, like it's really hard. Like, it's difficult.
Yeah, it's one, the specialization is also, but also identity based. Like when I started going to therapy after undergraduate, I was like, okay, I gotta find someone who's a person of color, preferably a queer, trans, or femme, or a woman of color who, understands that mental health, is a culture, it has cultural taboos, right? And so I had all these boxes, and I had to go to, like, because I have Kaisers, I had to be like, to look at their picture, I had to look at their specialization, and I had to do like a couple of internet stalking, like, what did you publish? Did you say anything about like intergenerational trauma, or like refugee or immigrant trauma, or even like, all these things. And those take a toll on you also, because you're legitly taking so much time trying to find, quote unquote, the perfect one.
Mm-hmm.
But that will never be perfect or close enough to being perfect. But you just need that form of support that sometimes you just like, whatever, like, who's next, who's available.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you just need that help right there, right? And for those who are listening, Suki was also very open about mental health and suicide. I went through that as well. I do identify as a suicide survivor, and there are supports out there, hotlines that you should be trying to reach out to. I work with minors. I work with high school students, and so I always tell my high school students, there's a lot of stuff that you're going through as well. So. And that's another factor, right? High school students or minors trying to find mental health services without the institution coming down at them with their parents. But there
Yeah.
are hotlines, suicide hotlines is very important for folks who are going through that immediate need to just talk to someone. And sometimes you just need to talk to someone, even though
Yeah.
it's a stranger. So even though if it's it's not your quote unquote regular therapist, if you have a regular therapist, I don't even like using the term regular now at that point. But that stranger sometimes is comforting enough that allows you to exhale and just be like, all right, I'm trying to reground myself.
Yeah. And I would like to speak to that a little more, because I know honestly, a lot of people's response to call a hotline is very negative.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do know people with negative experiences, and
Oh
I've
yeah.
had a negative experience myself, where I remember I called a hotline once, and the lady, I know she was trying to be nice, but it was very much like, oh, sweetie. Oh, I see. That's
Mm-hmm.
so hard. And I was like, I was so mad. I was like, why are you talking to me like I'm 5?
Yeah.
Like, like, I'm telling you, like, I want to kill myself, and you're treating me like I said I made a boo-boo on my coloring sheet and colored outside the lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to my therapist about that when I got to see her at the time. And she was like, you should tell them that the way they're speaking to you is making you more mad. And like that, that just never occurred to me.
Yeah.
It's
You
so
can you
interesting.
can you can talk back, right?
Yeah, you can talk back. You could be like, this isn't helpful. Please give me someone else, or like, let me tell you like why this is bad. Which is really hard. Like, if you're depressed, if you have anxiety, if you're feeling a lot of guilt and shame at the time, it's like, it's complicated. It's like, I understand why some of us would never say anything. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
understand why I didn't say anything, and I was just like super pissed, and I ended up hanging up. Like, it's so hard. But the thing, like, I want to say, like, I have also had that experience. Like, we're talking to a stranger, calling a hotline was nice, because I didn't have that feeling of anxiety or guilt that, like, this is someone who I know, and they're gonna tell my mom, or they're gonna tell my
Mm-hmm.
friend. Like, this is a complete stranger. You can tell them, you'd be like, I'm Jane. My name's Jane. Like, and they don't like, they're supposed to be just there to listen to you.
Yeah.
And even though there are going to be some bad experiences, there have also been a lot of people that I know who have really good experiences.
Yeah. Oh no, I once I'll tell you my story. So that I had an anxiety attack a couple years back, and actually was hospitalized because of it. But I did call the hotline, and I had that same experience. So I've called the hotline twice in my history of my life. One in high school, and in well, actually 2 times. One in high school, one in college, and then as an adult, just going through a lot of stuff. And that's when, during the time when I didn't have a job, transitioning from one job, and then going to graduate school, and then realizing I need a job and I need insurance. Um, and so I called, and it was same reaction. The lady was very soft spoken. Everything okay? What can I do for you? And you're just like, I'm going through trauma, and I'm trying to stay awake now because of you. Um, but at the end, after this whole thing, I was so irritated because I knew what she was supposed to be doing. That the latter part of it, like I didn't tell her what was going on. I was packing my shit up, and like I was in a hotel. I was packing my shit up. I was like, forget this. But I still stayed on the line with her, and then after she's like, all right, well, I think I know where you're going now. You where are you now so I can call the police and so you can get escorted to the hospital, blah blah blah, all the procedures, right? But I was so pissed off. I actually told her, actually, ma'am, I just needed you to listen to me. I actually drove myself to the hospital because I couldn't wait anymore. I'm here, thank you. And I hung up.
Sorry.
Because I was just like, you are not at all helpful right now, but I'm going to hold your conversation with me as an accountability that allows me to navigate and not freak out driving to the hospital, which is dangerous. Don't do that. But it was one of those moments where, because I was also very scared of the police. Like, I don't have a good experiences with the police growing up as well. Like, I've gone to jail. And so I've just had that already. Things like, oh, we're going to call the police. I'm like, oh, no, lady. No, 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 no. I mean, that encouraged me to a whole different level. But, sometimes you need those resources to figure out what kind of support you need. And it's always interesting in our conversation when you're a student and you have to call a hotline because your own campus can't give you the resources for those, right? And I've heard that so many times with students who are going through this. Like then all of a sudden, does student healthcare insurance provide copay or even payment for their medicine? Right, and so now they have to work extra for the copay, so or take it out of your student financial aid to pay for it. There's a lot of factors, and I think the university can do better and should be doing better, way better.
Oh God, yes.
And at the same time, the city, the county needs to do better. Like high schools also need to do better, and provide these resources and maybe restructuring rather than having visiting institutions market their job. I'm not gonna say it. Should I say it? Sure, I'll say it. Instead of having like police and like ROTC in there getting funding, why don't you put those money into counseling?
Yeah.
In the high school, a lot of students are going through different kinds of formations of identity and different struggles with their family and in community, and particularly in this time, if you're a student of color, particularly if you're a Black student right now, in high school, and seeing all these traumatic and painful and violent things that are happening nationwide and worldwide. Let's not talk about just the nation. Worldwide, you're bombarded with news, and then you have like 5 counselors who are overworked, who are also doing mental health services in high school, who's also doing, supporting students find out their classes, and parent teacher stuff. They're overworked.
Jobs.
Those are different jobs, and they're overworked already. And some of them don't even have the cultural competency to have conversations with students of color.
No.
So that's another thing. So I think what happens when schools from K to 12 through community college and 4-year institutions have monetized student mental health as these, you're paying your tuition. It's always a quote. It's always saying like, you're paying tuition, so use your campus resources, right? But those campus resources are also limited.
Yes.
And so you're looking at schools who have like what, 20,000 students with 30 counselors, and they're saying, well, not everybody goes to counseling, doesn't ask for support. It's like saying, just because I also watched the Titanic last night, like not everyone's gonna drown, so why do we need all these lifeboats and life vests? If it happens, it happens. Like no, like that's like the institution's being reactive rather than proactive.
Yes, and the thing is, like, people don't even know that the mental health services exist. Like I walked more than 5 people to CAPS, and they didn't even know it existed. I just did because I went there. And it's just like, they don't even know it exists. Like, how can you tell them, like, what are you going to say? Oh, well, read your manual. Like, read your stuff that tells you. I'm like, I feel like this should just be available. That's like smack dab everywhere. Like, and then like going back to those fluffies and succulents. right? The way that they tried to make mental health better. So I know this wasn't there the whole time, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the zone was there the whole time I was in college. I don't remember it. I remember
I
it
think
from
your time was just like starting up, I think.
maybe, yeah, because I remember the hardcore branding, but it was super weird because it was just like, this is a place to like relax and like de-stress. And they brought fluffies, they brought the dogs that you would just pet there. But it's like, what the fuck is this? Like, when you really think about it, it's just like, it's great to have dogs to pet because who doesn't love that? But at the same time, it's just like, you know, in reality for them, they're putting money like into other businesses because it's technically cheaper than giving the actual support that students need, which would be hiring more people, giving their psychiatrists and psychologists there more training, more funding, like, right? Like it reminds me of you know, when like workplace mental health started to be a thing. It's
Mm.
like, oh, my job, like they offer yoga classes now. Like, isn't that nice? They care about us. And I'm like, what they really cared about you, they would lessen your work hours and up your pay.
Mhm.
Like that would be their actual best form of mental health for you as an employer. Do you know what I mean? Not just offering a yoga class because they're picking the cheaper option that makes them seem nice. Like, yeah, it's nice to have a yoga class, but who cares if like you don't even want to go to the yoga class because you're so stressed because you have to like finish this project. You know what I mean? Like you're overworked and stressed out. Maybe you do go to it, but then you still have that like overwhelming feeling in your chest. Like, can I go home on time? Can I go on this
Mhm.
vacation with my family? Because I, there's so much work that needs to be done. And they like laid off these people. And so it's just me. It's just me now. You know, like it's like,
It's
I feel like
compounded, yeah.
it's compounded and like the priorities are just like way off. It very much, you know, and that's a way where I always felt like education was business.
Mhm.
You know, like it's like, let's just have more things for us to get money from. But when it comes to the students and their mental health and the things that they need, let's get them fluffies and succulents. Like the
And like I said,
cheapest
like
thing.
fluffies, I have dogs. I think they're, they do bring comfort, but they're also temporal. Like they bring you comfort for such a small amount of time. Yeah, you're stressing out at final or midterms, and there's these, wellness programs. But those wellness programs also have to be simultaneously being given to resources for like CAPS and psychological services. You can't just give one or the other, right?
Yeah.
You need to do both, and that's what student wellness and health and overall campus wellness looks like, is to make sure that the students get these resources, um, psychological and culturally competent psychologists and counselors on campus. I really cannot stress that out. Like there are various universities that I know who have like white male heterosexual counselors talking to queer black indigenous people of color, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, nothing has really changed. Well, guess what? Because you don't
No.
there's already that barrier there that you're never gonna get, right? um and then there's also the comments sometimes. Like I had one student who was telling me from another university that her counselor, like she's like, oh, she's getting migraines and she was getting like anxiety attack and everything. And the counselor's like, is it because your hair? 'Cause she's African American. Is it because your hair is too tied up? And she's like, where the heck does that come from? So those kinds of things exist, and people don't, like it's triggering. And I know some of your audience members would be like, what the hell did this just happen? Like, did I just hear that right? I'm like, yes. And those things happen in these small offices, and then they filter out and they end up coming to campus community centers because staff who hears it, because they trust the campus community center director, like the cross cultural center director or the pride center, the women's center. Um, and so they go to the staff and say like, this is my experience and so now we have these layers of like, how do we address this? And then when things hit the fan in the university is the first response would be like, this could have prevented, like we could have addressed black indigenous people of color mental health. I'm like, you could have addressed that like 10 years ago and you're reacting to now. and now you're like trying to figure out how to get these resources to be like, we have this black counselor, this indigenous. Well, I haven't really even been to a university with a Native American therapist or indigenous counselor, so I don't even want to say BIPOC for that. But I know and I've seen very problematic propping of Black and people of color therapists and psychologists at times of community, campus, and national unrest to the students and say, this is the Black counselor that you should talk to. And like, no, that's already, that by just doing that's already an epitome of anti-Blackness. Because you're saying to the rest of the students, this is the one counselor that we hired to address all the Black mental health concerns for the campus. And look at how much money we're pouring into this one individual. And look how now we're so liberal as an institution.
Yeah, it's really not about like the care of the students. Like, and like it is really important that you have someone who's culturally competent, because that, when like looking back at when I went to therapy, even though I did have like a good experience, like there are things that were definitely flawed. Like I never talked actually about half the stuff because I felt ashamed talking to this white woman. You know, like I felt like if I'm going to talk about, like I barely talked about my family because I felt if I talked about my family, it's going to be a betrayal, you know, but there are definitely things that we talked about that should have been like, we should talk about your family. Like what, you know, but like if you're not culturally competent, like you're not going to know. Like, you can't tell, you know, you're not going to tell the difference. It's like, is this person just being really anxious in general? Or is like, are they saying these different things that are signaling me to believe that there's also trauma? There's also things with the family that's like, you know, also compounding to what we're talking about. And they're sidestepping it. So, you know, like I need to be aware of that. You know, like being aware of these things, because it's like, you know, like when you're, you know, the whole shame thing.
Yeah.
You know, you're not supposed to do that, and how that makes your trauma worse, or that how that even causes your trauma, because now you're just holding things in because you feel like it's your responsibility to deal with, not your family's. Like,
and I think that's particularly for Asian Americans. Like, I mean, that's again, this, I'm not a therapist or social worker or counselor, but talking to my students, a lot of them would say like the first thing that they dread when it comes to like going to therapy, which is the same thing I hated, was when the counselor or therapist would say, so what about your family? And I'm like, no, don't ask me, because that's a whole different thing. I'm here to talk about these issues that I'm facing. But now if you're gonna, now that you said, well, how about your family, or like what is your relationship with your family like? No, that's a burden. That's another day. Like I can't put those two together at sometimes, and this is just me, like, right, I can't put those two together, because what I'm telling you now, and then what I'm with my family relationship, are two different traumatic things. Yes, they can intersect, and yes, they like, you know, they play off of each other, but I have to be in a different mental state to address family.
Yeah, and like it's important for people to realize that, or realize why. Like it's really strange, because I think, again, looking back, I think it affected my diagnosis, because like I wasn't diagnosed with like PTSD and CPTSD until like I was in my second therapist, like years after I went to college. Like I just was just like, oh yeah, you're depressed and you have general anxiety. And then later on, it's like, yeah, you do have these things, but it comes from the fact that you have PTSD and CPTSD. And I'm like, that's a different context, you know, like that's a whole different context, which I don't know why it was never brought up to me when I literally went there for a specific trauma. Like, isn't that weird? It's just like, what? How come no one said PTSD to me? Like, how come no one said the word trauma to me? And then it's so funny, like when you said before, like intergenerational trauma, like, right? That is something that people don't even know to look for that, right? It's just like knowing key words for what you're looking for is so important, but how are you supposed to know them if you're not given that support? You know, like that should be, it shouldn't just be like, you know, that checkbox that you fill in. It shouldn't just be like, what's your family history? Like, where's your insurance? It should just be like, how do you identify? Like, what things would make you comfortable? Like, it's fine if we need to write more, you know, like it's fine if we need to write more. Like, if you're just giving me a generic generic therapy isn't helpful. Like if you're just gonna be like, okay, well here's a therapist, and like not even take into account like, like I don't even know. Like if I was given a man, I think I just would have not gone. You know what I mean? Like I just would have like booked it. I would have just booked it and never came back.
You open the door and you're like,
yeah,
it's not gonna work out. This relationship is not gonna happen.
Yeah, and like, but see, like those things are important because therapy is not helpful if you are not comfortable with the person you're talking with.
It's like the minute you open the door, you're already triggered, and then you're gonna have to share. It's not gonna. But I think one of the things that I've been in conversation with a lot of folks around, looking for these resources, going to therapy, looking at like really thinking about like personal mental health and wellness and care, is to also not neoliberalize it and neo-paganize it. I've seen so many folks who are like, I'm not gonna go to therapy, I'm not gonna do this, but I'm gonna buy a crystal. And I'm like, no, like you can do, if you believe in that crystal can provide you energy, yes, but you also need to get these resources and these conversations with therapy and mental health practitioners. Like you can't just be like, I'm gonna give up everything because mental health is a Western construct and going to therapy is such Western mentality, etc., and I'm just gonna, do some ritual with crystals and ancestor stuff that all of a sudden like those are not gonna really support you. And yes, there are many critiques that we can do on the westernization and the cultural incompetency in mental health, in psychology and psychiatry and counseling, but there's also a lot of things that we need to also bring up into the community and not just rely on these sort of mythological perspective of self-care and self-help. And then again, that's where the succulents sometimes come from for me, is like there's a lot of conversations like, oh, you're depressed, you're anxiety, like maybe you should just plant a tree. I'm like, I can plant a tree and also still be depressed and have anxiety. Like I need a different kind of help on that, right? But yeah, I'm very scared of a lot of trends right now about instead of actually looking for support and resources, they're investing in these like I want to say neo-paganisque, neoliberal kinds of practices, which like I said, you can, and you need to also do something else.
Yes. So I want to share like a story. I want to share a story because I completely agree. People definitely don't realize like professional help, your crystals, your aromatherapy, your scents, like they can all work together. Like, and you should like, like the things that give you comfort and joy, you should work with them in conjunction. But they're, and I know it's because people are really scared of therapy and now it has become like this Western thing that's not perfect, but nothing is perfect. But it's like professional help is something that you should try if you're really struggling, because you cannot fix your PTSD with a crystal. And I literally, okay. So it's when I was still super heavily on Instagram, and I'm trying to get back there. But it's like when I first switched over from fitness to mental health, I was doing stuff and, people comment on your stuff. People want to collaborate with you. And there's this person on Facebook. It was this Asian girl. And she wrote to me and she does crystals and stuff. And I thought she was asking me to collaborate. Like, do you want to do a live show or something like that? But really what she meant, she was trying to sell me crystals. And her wording was really strange. Like, it kind of like rubbed me the wrong way because it seemed like she was saying, I can solve your mental illness with my crystals. Like, that was what she said. Like almost verbatim. I know there was like a really weird adjective in there and I don't remember it because it was really weird. But she was basically saying I can solve like your mental illness with my crystals. And so when she said that to me, I was like, I know that you're trying to do good things and I'm not trying to invalidate what you do, like the importance of what you do. I do think it's very harmful to tell people that you can solve their mental illnesses with your crystals. Like, because she also started specifically mentioning like PTSD or like, things like bipolar. And it's just like, medication is needed for specific things and it might not be forever. And I'm totally, like I do definitely feel like America goes to pharmaceuticals and medication for too many things. Mental illness is one where I'm just like, no, this is very nuanced, and medication is something that you actually need to, for some of us, definitely need to explore and need. And so I told her that, and then she went off on me. This girl was like, no, I'm going to solve people's PTSD with my crystal. Like, she just went off and just like said all these horrible things, but was so adamant about it. And I was just trying to tell her, like, that you can't do that to people. Like, because the thing is, like, if someone comes to you in their hour of need, like, I'm sorry, a crystal is not going to fix someone's PTSD. And if someone comes to you in their hour of need and this crystal doesn't work for them, that could be it for that person. It's just like mental health is very tricky, and there needs to be some sort of professional handling around it, especially when it comes to mental illness. It's just like, don't make these promises to these people, because once they, like, it doesn't work for them, like, you are putting them in this place. I'm thinking specifically of people who are like suicidal too.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and they're like, oh, what am I going to hold on to the end? Like, someone with crystals promising me, it's one thing to offer these services. It's another thing to claim that you can literally cure their mental illness. Because some people will go for that because they're hurting, they're suffering. And so if they hold on and you obviously cannot deliver, like, that is dangerous. And some people are like that, and it sucks, especially knowing, like, crystals, like sage, like when it comes to like essential oils, those are all great things. You cannot, but if someone promises that they can heal everything for you, like, it's just become all MLM marketing now, which sucks, because these things can be good for you, but they're not a cure. They're being promised as cures now.
Yeah.
Like,
and I think and I think it's also really, we need to really address how it's marketed. So I've seen multiple people, and I'm rolling my eyes a lot on that, because there was a Filipina who was like, oh yeah, like these crystals will cleanse you, will clean your energy, etc., etc. This is something our ancestors did. I'm like, one, as an Igorot and also someone who's like part Moro, like I'm an indigenous person from the Philippines. I'm like, I don't know which indigenous communities do crystals.
Like, not ours.
So not ours, obviously.
Not ours.
For me, I'm just like, so you're co-opting like the national Filipino, like, pre-colonial imaginary with crystals now, that all of a sudden, like, your ancestors healed themselves with quartz and all these things. I'm like, really? Like, I don't think that's real. I don't think that, I have never, as a historian also, I've never seen anything about that. And then there's also moments when these folks would be like, oh, you have to use white sage to cleanse the house and your energy and all that. And I'm like, okay. And how is that also appropriating native ways of healing, right? Because I think those crystals, sage, and like essential oils and all stuff, do have a function in certain cultures also, right? Certain ways, like certain ways of eating, like particularly like different kinds of vegetables, making it into a tea, all that. Those have non-Western, and very cultural specific kinds of self-healing and self-care. But I don't have the right to practice that because that's not my people, you know? And so I find I'm having a hard time seeing a lot of folks all of a sudden start clumping like different indigenous and different neo-pagan kinds of rituals, in lieu of actually looking for self-care, in lieu of actually looking for mental health services and resources that they can go to. So now you're drinking tea with a crystal and then burning sage, and then that will release why you have, anxiety, because your anxiety is a demon possession or something like that.
Yes, it's so interesting, because like, it's very wrong to be like, you can just pray your mental illness away. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, no, like, I'm sorry, no.
It's supposed to be, prayer is supposed to be in addition to.
Yes,
it shouldn't be the answer to.
Yes, it's in addition. And the thing is, like, okay, I'm gonna be honest, I'm a fan of the placebo effect. Like, you know, like, because I don't know, like, I've been given crystals before, and I think it's really nice. And for me, like, it makes me feel nice more out of like sentimental value and more, and even like if like my friend who gave it to me like really believes in that properties, that makes me feel good too. And if it works, I'm gonna go with that placebo effect. Like, I don't really know, or like the fact that, like, you know, it's making me feel great, wonderful. But it's just like, also like, yes, please don't. Again, it's in conjunction with, because there are things like professional help. You know, I know that mental health is just super hard.
Yeah.
Dealing with your mental health is hard. Dealing with your trauma, dealing with your mental illnesses is hard.
And this whole conversation we're having is gonna trigger many people.
Yes.
And that should be okay too. Like, you just can't be like, I'm so triggered, I don't want to listen, or I'm so triggered, I'm like gonna distance myself. I think these conversations, particularly, even if you go to the most specific of our identities in the Irad community, like, when do we talk about, like, we can generalize, like how in the Filipino American community they don't talk about mental health, or Filipino community as a whole. But then you have to also put the compounded layer of identity, culture, and indigeneity on that. And so, what do a good community address mental health?
Yeah, it's just, yes, professional. I will always be an advocate for professional help. Like, because with professional help, especially if you said like has those specificities in it, as a cultural competency in it, it really will help unpack a lot of things. Because, like, you know, this crystal does not know your history. You know, like, these different things, it doesn't know your history. You do. The thing about professional help is that you're helping yourself with the guidance of someone. Like, that's really what it is. Your therapist isn't a crystal too. They're not like a save-all. Like, they're there to help guide you to exploring what has happened here and help you guide to like take a safe, healthy journey. But it's not like, but they can't just cure you either. Like, mental health doesn't work that way. And it's just, it's not simple. You can't solve your anxiety with fluffies or succulents. You can have an emotional support dog if you really need that, and that really will help you. But guess what? The working services dogs, like the service dogs, they're trained to stop their owners who have, you know, who self-inflict harm. You know, those dogs are trained too. Those service dogs are trained. That's the thing. It's like, it has that professional thing behind it. Like, just petting a dog is nice and will release endorphins, but there's also like the difference in that too. Like, please realize that there's emotional support dogs, or dogs they bring in for you to pet, and then there are dogs that are literally trained to help you not harm yourself.
And then, well, don't even bring me into the conversation of how universities suck when it comes to support animals and their policies. I don't even know how to start with that.
Yes. It's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Because they're like, well, how's the rest of the dorms gonna feel about if you have a pet and they can't have a pet? I'm like, this is not a pet.
It's a service animal. It's a service animal. You like, and see that. Okay, I know we said don't get started, but obviously it's illegal because it's super discriminatory. Like, obviously, like, you can't do that. Just like people who rent out houses can't do that. If it's an actual service animal, you have to let them have it. Service animals are no joke. They're no joke. So I just realized that it's been an hour. That went by really
I don't even know. We're you know, everywhere.
I like it.
Yeah, it's a good thing. And like I said, like, the conversation we're having right now is going to be triggering for many people who's watching, because they're like, no, I don't know. They have set beliefs already around, if it's not mental health and it's around community services, campus, and how their primary campus might be, you know, supportive enough, you know, and all the way to the crystals. Like, some people might be invested in that. But I think those are the nuances and the questions that many folks are actually having discussions outside of your immediate circle of like, does this work? How do we make this work better? Is there any way we can restructure? Um, so if for the audience members who might be like, I'm pissed off, you said that, like, you were against the sage, think about it, like, why are you pissed off? Because some people don't have the luxury to do both sage and mental health. Think about that part, that they don't have both of them. And so how are they navigating through their own trauma, their own pain, their own mental health? Um, because we know I'm privileged enough to have insurance now. I go to therapy, but I also tend, like, it was only very recently when I would tell my, like, moving back with my mom, saying like I have therapy, and she'll be like, but now she's like, when are you going to therapy? I can sense your energy, like. So now I have a little bit more open conversation with my mom around mental health, along with my siblings. But and it's not something that everyone has, and it's sometimes really painful to even think about having a conversation with your family around mental health.
Yes. And I think that's so important that you said, ask yourself, like, why are you so triggered if you disagree? Because the thing is with mental health, it is going to be very different for everyone. And the answer needs to always be, we should all be able to try everything. You know what I mean? We should have that accessibility to try different ways of approaching our mental health. And if you shut away professional help just because it's too westernized, like you're taking support away from someone else. Like you really are. Like you're taking support away from something else that, like, there are professionals. This has been studied over and over.
But be careful on that too. The professionalism of it all also is very problematic, because like there's many folks who would be like, I don't know what I'm going through. So, and then all of a sudden they see this one or two books around their identity and psychology and all that, and then they read it, and then they're like, I got it. I solved my own mental health because I read one book. Like, no, 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 no. That book is like a theoretical framework. That could be that someone's tenured book. It could be critiqued by many people, even in the field. So like, don't base like your wellness already just because you read a book or an article around your culture and psychology and mental health. Like there has to be more than that.
No, that stuff is like supplemental and helping to give you like context.
The word. Yeah.
Like because it's great. Like you should definitely read those things, and if they help you, great. But please, yeah, that is also not a cure-all. And just because you read a book does not mean like you know everything. Like that's not it either. I want to ask you one question before we end this. I know there's so much to say. We need to have like a part 2. I want to end with this one question, and you can repeat things that you've said before, or you can say new things. What are the top 3 things you would like to say to your students or other college students when it comes to advocating for their own mental health?
Well, it's so funny because I can tell the stories and the problems of the institution and how students, but then as an advice, I think that's the eye, right? The struggle into that, because it's always going to be the neoliberal institution who ends up deciding what resources and what support looks like. No matter how much the students advocate for change, advocate for resources, advocate for their communities on campus. The end of the day, if like, and I always tell my students this, particularly where I work and with other campus centers who was created by students, if you make it, they will take it. And so if you demand campus resources, sometimes they might, neoliberalize it. And so being really direct at what you want and what you need, and not letting the institution find that one loophole, that one that one word that they can flip on you. Like when you say, "Oh, I want mental health services," demand demand the campus a psychologist with particular identities, not just we need more counselors. Like, be specific in your demand. And the students form of activism is actually what the university is scared of, because they hate being in the news and they hate having campus issues. So I'm totally for flipping it over and being like, if you're not, let's tell folks why we don't have these services, and that thing. Another thing, like I said earlier, in the latter part of this conversation, is books, uh, crystals, sage, all these things that you might use should be in addition to looking for these mental health services and resources, going to therapy, going to counseling. Um, it should not take over and replace. Yeah, you can, for Filipino Americans, let's say, the intergenerational trauma can be due to colonial mentality, and you can name a book and you can name a page. That doesn't solve your the trauma that you're going through right now. You have words, you have theories now, you have a page now, a reference, but you need to do the extra work and try to figure out what resources are available for you out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, because resources out there can be also traumatizing, can also be painful, being gracious to yourself and saying things like, like having that one experience with a bad therapist does not mean all therapists are like that, right? Sometimes it's painful to look for someone new, um, and sometimes it's also uh, something that you want to just give up on and be like, forget it, I'm just gonna do it myself. Doing it yourself should not be the priority when it comes to when you're going through pain and trauma. Um, so making sure that when I say, let's say this, when I say take care of yourself, self-love, self-care, self-wellness, it also means being gracious to yourself and saying things like, I can't do this right now, maybe not right now, I need to take a break, I need to turn off gadgets, I need to just be by myself, I just need to breathe, I just need to think, I just need to actually self-love, rather than use the term self-love as some cushion for other things.
Ooh, yes. That was good. And I want to add a little bit just because I think it's really important and because of like who I am and what I do. So going back to, what Manong said about what Jojo said about
So then, Manong, that's how we know each other.
how like the crystal and the books and stuff. So okay, I want to say this and I want to be very clear. So I'm going to look at the camera while I'm saying this. I am a YouTuber and I make content about mental health. I am not a mental health professional. I share things that I have learned because I know that professional help isn't always easy for people to get.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, for some people, it's not available. That does not mean that what I am saying will cure you. I am not saying what I present, and even professional therapists on who make YouTube videos, even what they present, it's information. But the thing, it's that is not professional help for you. That is not therapy, because therapy is very individualized. It's very about you and you doing work. Watching videos and stuff, they may be helpful, but please also take those things with a grain of salt. I got a disclaimer on my stuff because I'm not a professional. You need to know that. What I say is definitely from my heart and from my experience. And I want to share because I know it's really hard for people to get therapy. That is not a reason why you shouldn't look for professional help. It is not a reason to just be this is enough. Again, even if you're watching a professional therapist channel, please do not tell yourself that is enough. Tell yourself if this is all you have access to now, great. You're going to reach out to as many things as you can, but please know that is very different from actual professional help. And that's something you should definitely, even if you're scared, you should try, and you should try to get, because that's something that you should have a right to. Just as you'd have you have a physical doctor, having a mental health doctor makes sense too. The reason why it seems so weird is just because it's heavily stigmatized right now.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it's not important or just as important as having a what are they called? Your general doctor. That's wrong. Your something physician, whatever.
General
What
physician,
I mean?
general practitioner.
Sure. Yes. It's one of those. It's we should also have those in our lives. Don't limit yourself, and don't try to tell yourself that XY is enough. These crystals are enough, these books are enough. No, they're great in supplement. They're great with, they're great with context with. And I just want to make that very clear, because I do YouTube, and I know there are people who won't, say that to you because they want to sell. And that's fine if you want to follow people and stuff, but please be aware of the content you're getting and what it really means for you. It's not a cure. It's not a solution. It's more information. It's more points of view. And that's it. That's it. Okay. Okay. So Joseph, this has been really great having you. This conversation went by so freaking quickly, and there's so much I still want to talk about. So, I mean, at some point, I'm just going to have you on again. And it would be interesting too, and you don't have to do this, but it would be interesting to have one of your students with you too. That'd be really interesting. But we don't have to do that. I'm just saying.
Waiver form.
Yeah, that's a waiver form, or someone else that has maybe gone through it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, thank you so much for being here. Please check out Joseph. Ekat Voices is down there.
Ekat Voices is indigenous peoples from the Philippines, and so we're trying to uplift sort of what does it mean to be indigenous and a cultural minority outside of the U.S., outside of the general norm of being Filipino. So, and I think that's where Trixie and I can connect a lot. Is maybe one day there'll be a book on Igorot mental health and psychology.
That would be cool. I'd be so down. And lastly, if you have extra money, please consider donating to Dee Dee McClure SD Bailout. It's down there, and it's also in my comments. That is San Diego's local grassroots bail fund. Please consider. Please remember that there are people still protesting. Please remember that Black lives still matter.
Yeah.
That is still going on. Think about how to ingrain it into your everyday life. So thank you, everyone. And we'll see you tomorrow, where we have Khalil, who's actually coming to talk about soul care workers, which is another mental health, which is a mental health organization in our San Diego community. So that's going to be really cool. Please check that out tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Bye.